And so our focus had to shift to making sure that we didn't compromise the position we'd already gained to Sainz with Lewis. Did Lewis get any damage to the car after the collision with Perez? Well, thankfully nothing significant. He did lose some small bits from his car, but the performance wasn't significantly affected and crucially the balance of the car. So we didn't need to adjust the strategy to compensate for that damage. Actually, more significant was the fact that both of our cars lost positions at the start after all of that contact. We were already on the back foot, having qualified 7th and 8th, and we knew it was going to be a challenging race to get ahead of Ferrari, needing a few things to go our way, and the start certainly didn't go our way. So why did George opt for the one-stop strategy? Was he experiencing low deg, and did the team plan for a one-stop race? Ultimately, Suzuka is a very challenging circuit strategically. On the one hand, you have very high tyre degradation because there's a lot of corners, a lot of them are very high speed and put a lot of load through the tyres, and also the track surface is very old and abrasive. High degradation generally leads you to want to make multiple stops, 2, maybe even 3 stops. But on the other hand, Suzuka is one of the harder tracks to overtake. It's certainly no Monaco or Singapore, but it's within that group of very difficult overtaking. And so from there, you want to focus on track position, and one of the best ways of getting track position is to make less stops than other people. Given we were starting behind all of our main competitors, our focus strategically in that race was how do we regain some track position. Now, if you do the same strategy as everyone else, which we knew was going to be a 2-stop, you can potentially gain 1 or 2 places at each stop with an undercut. We knew the 1-stop was unlikely to be faster than a 2-stop, but George had very little to lose. We were already behind everyone, and so it was likely we could take a risk without any big downsides. The benefit of the 1-stop is if we were a bit wrong on our numbers, there's a chance that the degradation comes in slightly lower, overtaking slightly harder than we expected, and George can hold off some cars at the end of the race. On the other hand, even if he does have to convert back to a 2-stop, being on that offset 1-stop strategy gave him track position for a really large portion of the race, and he'd have been quids in if a safety car or a VSC had been deployed. So when we were discussing strategy plans at the start of the race, our plan A was a 2-stop, but plan B was very much a 1-stop. And we understood the factors that would bring that into play are if we saw lower degradation, if we saw really tricky overtaking, but also if we had the right safety car interruptions. So the first few laps of the race being under safety car conditions give the tyres a much easier time. It effectively makes the race a shorter race, and the shorter the race is, the more competitive the 1-stop could be. Was qualifying P7 and P8 for Lewis and George the maximum that could have been achieved? Well, in a word, yes. Unfortunately, Suzuka is a track which really highlights the deficiencies in our car. We're lacking downforce in really crucial speed range for this circuit, and so we knew it was going to be challenging. Indeed, if you look at practice sessions, we finished P1 13th and 16th, and in P2 Lewis was still down in 14th. So there was a great recovery job by the guys, both trackside and also back at the factory and in the simulator, to do a lot of work on Friday night to get the car in a better place. Much as it pains us to say it, getting both cars safely through to Q3 and qualifying P7 and 8 was actually a pretty good result for this car at this track. Do you think we could have kept both cars ahead of Sainz? Now, ultimately, we'll never know. One of the beauties of sport is that you can never be sure what's going to happen, and that's why we love competing in it and people love watching it. Our real challenge that race was trying to fight Ferrari. We were on the back foot, having qualified behind, had a bad start, and our pace was nip and tuck. Realistically, even if we could have got one car ahead of one Ferrari, that represented a good result for us. We already had that with Lewis having undercut Sainz, so we needed to be careful not to compromise the gains we'd already made. In this situation, it would be lovely if there was a pause button or you could take a time out and we could just chat and discuss with the drivers. We could have understood from George how the tyres were feeling and how likely it was that he'd be able to maintain his pace as the race progressed, and we could have spoken to both of them about the options for defending. Overtaking is difficult in Suzuka, but it's no Singapore. Whilst the vast majority of overtakes happen in the DRS zone into turn 1, there's still around 50% of overtakes that are scattered around the rest of the track. And so I'm sure we could have worked together as a team to defend both of their positions into turn 1, but the question is, would that have put us at risk and the rest of the circuit? Had Sainz been able to overtake Lewis, then George would have been a sitting duck. So given what we saw with how easily Piastri and Leclerc were able to get through George, The writing was really on the wall for him, and it was overwhelmingly likely that whatever we tried to do, he wasn't going to be able to defend those positions. And so our focus had to shift to making sure that we didn't compromise the position we'd already gained to science with Lewis. We did give it our best shot with the two cars, but ultimately this is not a circuit where that works, and George was always destined to finish in P7, unfortunately. How did Fred help in the simulator on Friday? Well, the simulator is a real crucial tool to help us develop and set up the car. Whilst the track is the ultimate location where we go racing, it's got a lot of limitations. We don't have much time during practice, but even if we did, we don't have enough tyres. And with track evolution and traffic, conditions are always changing, so unpicking the subtle effect of different setup changes can be very difficult. That's where the simulator really comes into its own. Once we've understood the limitations of the car in P1 and P2, then the guys back at the factory, together with the simulator drivers, can work through many different setup options in completely stable conditions. Now, obviously, the simulator is not the track, and we really rely on the simulator drivers to be able to translate and understand what's going to work well when we get back to the racetrack and what's more specific to the simulator. We're really lucky to have two great simulator drivers in Mick and Fred helping us with this work during races this year, and this race it was Fred's turn. We had a very difficult car balance and poor performance on Friday, and so the work that Fred did with the simulator team is a real testament to that turnaround, and we saw particularly with Lewis going from a P14 and P2 up to being able to put it P7 on the grid. A huge part of that was due to the work that Fred and the simulator team did. Is it worth further upgrading the current car, or do all resources go into next season's development? Ultimately, this decision is never as black and white as it seems. Whilst we will have to use the winter to make more fundamental developments to W15, there's plenty of things we can do with the current car which will both make it faster and aid our learning and understanding to develop next year's car. And that's what we've already been doing and will continue to do. So the new parts we bring to the track do both. Hopefully add performance and make the current car go faster, but they're all specifically targeted around areas where we need to further our understanding, and the things we'll learn from testing them this year will directly feed into the development of the W15. We also mustn't lose sight of the fact that we're in a really tight battle for P2 with Ferrari, and that position in the championship is really important to all of us. And so we have upgrades in the pipeline and we'll continue to be bringing them to the car.